Our speaker today is Alex Soltoff, and his topic is, what is a good death? Alex is a fourth-year PhD student in health policy and management at Emory's Rollins School of Public Health. His primary research interests center on understanding how to ameliorate the physical, emotional, social, and spiritual suffering associated with serious illness and end of life through policy and behavioral interventions. All of his research touches on the question, how can we ensure people have high-quality end-of-life care no matter where they live or what their resources? Prior to starting graduate studies at Emory, Alex spent 5 years at the Massachusetts General Hospital, where he worked as a project coordinator for the Great Plains Lakota Research Collaborative, a partnership between Massachusetts General, the Rosebud Sioux, Oglala Sioux, and Cheyenne River Sioux tribes, and several institutions in South Dakota that work together to improve health outcomes in Great Plains tribal nations through community-based participatory research. His dissertation will specifically examine how profit motivations influence hospice care delivery and the quality of hospice services across the United States. Yeah. Please welcome Alex Soltoff.
Why didn't you make it an easy job?
That's a great question. Yeah, I was asking myself that yesterday. Yeah. Thanks, Wade. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to start off my spoken word today with the introduction to one of my favorite stand-up specials. So bear with me. Forget that I've already been on stage. Pretend like I'm a comedian who's just starting the stand-up special. And as a heads up, I'm going to completely butcher this. And also, this is supposed to be funny. So. Hello, everybody. Hello. I mean, by everybody, I mean you guys. I mean everybody who's here. I shouldn't say everybody because most people are not here. But a pretty huge majority. Most people are in China, actually. That's true. Actually, that's not true. Most people are dead. Did you know that? That's true. Of all the people that have ever lived, almost all of them are dead. There are way more dead people than living ones. And you're all going to die. And then you're going to be dead for way longer than you're alive. Like, that's mostly what you're ever going to be. You're just dead people that didn't die yet. It's supposed to be funny, yeah. I first realized that I am just a dead person that has yet to die in the fall of 2004. It might surprise some of you to learn that in fall of 2004, I was an 11-year-old sixth grader at Brown Middle School in Newton, Massachusetts. And one day, when I was sitting in Spanish class, a thought hit me out of nowhere that went something like, oh my God, holy crap, someday I won't be here anymore. I will actually die. All of this will just stop. I'll stop existing. Scary, 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 scary. And I can't imagine how I must have looked having an existential crisis in the middle of some unprecedented Spanish class. But I vividly remember the panic, sadness, and sense of injustice. I can remember envisioning myself 6 feet underground while life carried on above. People laughing, crying, falling in love, making discoveries, and I would not get to see any of it. And I share all of this with you today because a while ago, Stell Simonton asked me if I talked to the congregation about my research. And I have a mentor at Emory who says all research is me-search, which is to say that I've been obsessed with death and dying for a long time now, so it's no wonder that death is what I choose to study. Yeah. As Wade mentioned, I'm no longer in the 6th grade. I'm now a 4th-year PhD student in health policy at Emory, and my research, influenced by my fascination with death, centers on how to improve the quality of hospice and palliative care services across the U.S. And while my obsession with death and dying began in 2004, the the story of how I got into my research begins in early 2019. That year, I was working as a clinical research coordinator at Massachusetts General Hospital when my boss invited me to join a grant proposal. For a few years, Mass General had been engaged in a tribal academic partnership with the Rosebud Sioux Tribe in South Dakota, a federally recognized sovereign nation located within the Rosebud Indian Reservation and home to the Sicangu Lakota people. The local clinic in Rosebud is partly staffed by a rotating group of MGH faculty physicians, endearingly known in the community as the Boston Ducks, who spend 2-week stints providing medical care on the reservation at the IHS, the Indian Health Service. From the very beginning of MGH's relationship with Rosebud, Sicangu Lakota leaders and stakeholders in the community expressed 2 clear goals. They wanted their people to be born on their land and die on their land. And to this day, neither of those goals has been fully realized. In response to what clinicians were hearing on the ground in Rosebud, our team at MGH, really my boss, Katrina, proposed a new study. We aim to work alongside cancer patients, survivors, families, local leaders, and traditional healers and clinicians to co-develop a culturally congruent palliative care intervention for people living with advanced cancer. Not just in Rosebud, but also on the Pine Ridge and Cheyenne River reservations, which are also located in West River, South Dakota. We submitted the proposal to the NIH in early 2019. As a side note, there's absolutely no goddamn way that grant would have gotten funded under our current administration. But find me after Celebration of Life if you want to hear my thoughts about that. Anyway, by the end of that year, so 2019, we were awarded about $2.5 million to carry out the work with plans to launch our study in 2020. And at that time, I'd had very little personal experience with cancer, but shortly after we submitted the grant, my mom was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer. She ended up receiving treatment, she recovered well, she's still doing great, really wasn't that big a deal. However, just as she finished treatment, and just as our grant was funded, my dad, Steve, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of acute myeloid leukemia. And while my dad's condition worsened over the course of 2020, really, our study in South Dakota was just getting off the ground. And we began interviewing patients, healers, tribal leaders, and clinicians to understand 3 core questions before we came up with our intervention. Those questions were, what did cancer and end of care currently look like on the reservations? What is needed to live well and die well with cancer? And what sorts of palliative care interventions would feel appropriate for the community? As I began doing this work professionally, I was stunned by the contrast between what I was hearing in my Zoom interviews in South Dakota and what I was experiencing at home in Boston, where my dad Steve's cancer had taken a final turn for the worse. My mom, my brother, and I still feel truly blessed that my dad could spend his final 3 weeks as an inpatient at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, a world-class cancer center just 25 minutes from our front door, my mom's front door in Newton, Mass. And in his last days, my dad received 24-hour nursing care, daily visits from oncology physicians, and support from an interdisciplinary palliative care team, including a doctor, a social worker, and a chaplain. I'll return to the importance of that interdisciplinary team in a moment, but for patients living rurally on reservation land in South Dakota, an experience like mine is almost unimaginable. Native patients living in rural reservation communities experience so many barriers to receiving advanced cancer and end-of-life care, and in turn they experience so many barriers to a dignified death. If someone with cancer complications like my dad's were living on the res, they'd likely show up to the local clinic and more or less immediately get led back to Sioux Falls, a city over 5 hours away by car. Their family would then have to find a way to get there, pay for hotels, and navigate a medical system that has failed them for generations. Rather than provide a synopsis of the interviews our team conducted, I wanted to share with you all a few direct quotes from my research that stayed with me over the years. And for context, what I'm about to share are words from the people that we spoke to, leaders, patients, and clinicians, describing various barriers to receiving both curative cancer care as well as end-of-life care. So the first one, this is from a tribal leader talking about the lack of infrastructure. If I had a magic wand, I would definitely want a hospice here on the reservation so we could support those people, those families that want their loved ones at home, because culturally, that's a huge thing. Our people want to be home. Something else we heard, a large majority of our patients don't have vehicles, they don't have the financial means to go stay in the city when their loved ones are sick. That was from another local leader. This next one is from one of the Boston docs, one of the MGH physicians who rotates in Rosebud. I feel that stress with dying is in some instances exacerbated by feeling and knowing that you are, the native patients are, not getting the quality of care that you deserve. That the patient is seeking care from a healthcare institution that has sort of violated their rights or caused worsening historical trauma, or that the patient is receiving care from people that are white people that are a part of settler colonialism. People feel a lot of times like they're receiving compromised medical care, and that can make end-of-life care more difficult. This is another quote from MGH doctor. The low trust in the health system is a major barrier to discussing end-of-life care plans. Those are plans for treatments patients might want or might not want at the end of life. It's a very difficult conversation to have in a place where the health system has genuinely failed the community for so long. The following came from a chaplain in Sioux Falls. The barrier that I think is really significant for anyone, for any Native person hospitalized here, is the fact that they are plucked out of their community with nothing but the clothes on their back and brought to this hospital and plunked down in a culture that is traumatized and cut them off from their own history and culture. This next one is from a community member, from a cancer survivor. Cancer care does not work when you're dealing with IHS, the Indian Health Service, and you live on the reservation. It doesn't work because there's no facilities, there's nothing. And if you don't have a real strong family support behind you, you're in trouble, because otherwise, there's nothing out there. And finally, this next quote isn't about a barrier or dying, it's actually probably more about healing, but it stayed with me because it paints a beautiful picture of what spiritual care or traditional care can look like out there. In our interviews, we specifically heard about three important traditional practices. So there's smudging, which is the burning of sage. There's the sun dance. I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, but Uwayan Wachi is how it is pronounced in Lakota. And then the Anipi, or sweat lodge ceremony. And from a patient, this is from a patient describing the Anipi. My cousin had an Anipi for me, and I remember that night I was sleeping, and all of a sudden my grandma was in my dream. And not only my grandma, but there was all these other women. This was like my grandma's mom and her mom, and there were like 7 women in this hospital room. And my grandma came to me and said, "We're here and we're with you." And then on, it's like, I know I'm going to be okay. When I reflect on those interviews and on my own father's death, which again were happening at pretty much the same time, I come back to this question. What is a good death? That's what I've titled today's spoken word. As a public health academic, I've spent a lot of time reading research articles that ask questions with relatively definitive and objective answers. Things like, how does Legionnaire's disease spread? How can we improve the implementation of mental health interventions in Veterans Affairs in the VA? What policies would make healthcare more affordable to low-income individuals? I am so sorry to inform you all that if you came here today hoping for a clear, objective, definitive answer to the question, what is a good death? I'm not sure I have a good one for you. Still, I'll try to give you an answer. And I think a good place to begin answering our question of what is a good death is by reflecting on the origins of hospice and palliative care as a medical specialty. These fields, hospice and palliative care, emerged in the mid-20th century, the time when deaths in hospital had become the norm, especially in industrialized countries. Advances in medicine had extended life expectancy, but also institutionalized and medicalized the dying process. Patients were, and I would argue often are still now, kept alive through aggressive interventions, typically in intensive care units, with little attention to comfort, personal values, or dignity. Death was seen as a failure of the medical system, rather than a meaningful part of life. One person who pushed back against the notion of death as a medical failure was Dame Cicely Saunders, a nurse, social worker, and physician, widely recognized as the founder of the modern hospice movement. Dame Saunders was deeply disturbed by the way people were dying in hospitals, often alone, in pain, and stripped of their personhood. In response, she introduced the concept of total pain, a groundbreaking framework acknowledging suffering beyond the physical. Saunders argued that end-of-life pain encompasses emotional distress, social isolation, and spiritual anguish. Addressing total pain required more than morphine. It necessitated presence, empathy, and genuine human connection. It called for interdisciplinary teams and a philosophy prioritizing comfort and dignity over curative treatment. Hospice, thus, represented not merely a medical intervention, but a social intervention, built explicitly around this comprehensive and holistic understanding of suffering, of total pain as being physical, emotional, spiritual, and social. So, if pressed to offer one answer to the question, what is a good death, it's this. I think a good death is one in which the dying person and those who love them are as free as possible from total pain, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual. All things considered, when I think about my dad's death, I'd say it was a pretty good one. And when I think about why, a few factors immediately come to mind, all of which revolve around the relief of his and my family's total pain. First, we had sufficient medical support so that my mom, my brother, and I didn't need to act as caregivers in my dad's final weeks. We didn't have to manage his physical pain or symptoms. Instead, we simply got to be his family. That experience is rare. For many people across the country, especially those living on rural reservations, it's uncommon to be freed from the caregiving responsibilities and to be able to accompany a loved one through the completion of life. Second, in the immediate wake of my dad's death, the services for which my family felt most grateful were not medical. Instead, they were social services that addressed our emotional, spiritual, and existential pain. While my family is Jewish, it just so happened that the one rabbi serving as chaplain at the Dana-Farber had recently retired. Initially skeptical of other chaplaincy services, we quickly formed a strong bond with a non-denominational Christian chaplain named John. For 3 weeks, John visited nearly every day, asking about the family photos we had lined up on the hospital room's lone window, and sharing reflections inspired by the previous day's conversation. Group conversations with John, both John as well as similar chats with my dad's social worker, provided a meaningful space to reflect on shared memories. Holding up a family photo from, say, Yellowstone National Park, reminiscing on the memory with the chaplain or social worker, and pausing to cherish it felt particularly significant. Sharing with a supportive third party made those moments at the end feel uniquely special, much more special than if we had just reminisced alone. Without the presence of these social and spiritual care providers, it's possible we might not have even reflected on those cherished moments at all. Finally, my family felt incredibly fortunate that my dad could die in a setting we all preferred. I don't really have a nice home in Newton, and we didn't want him to be at home. We wanted him to be in the hospital where he could receive palliative blood transfusions and other complex treatments that wouldn't have been possible elsewhere. COVID also threw a whole wrench into all this stuff, but I'm not going to talk about that. I recognize, however, that most people don't live just 25 minutes from the Dana-Farber, and a good death isn't possible in a hospital. It usually happens from the comfort of their home. As my dad was dying and I was conducting those interviews in South Dakota, I felt a calling to dedicate my professional life to improving access to and quality of hospice and palliative care. The challenges I encountered in South Dakota weren't unique. They are so obviously present across countless American communities. To me, the solutions here aren't complicated. Relieving total pain rarely means expensive medical equipment or decades of elite surgical expertise. Often, it simply takes people who have the time and willingness to build trust, show empathy, and accompany someone through the final stages of life. To quote a cancer survivor our team interviewed, "What I desire most is companionship. You know, when you can't sleep at night, when you're awake at 3 or 4 in the morning, wrestling in your mind with all the heavy-duty stuff you face." For most people, I believe a good death and freedom from total pain requires a good deal of social support. It means having companions, sometimes a single person, sometimes a whole team, who can sit with you, hear your stories, and bear witness as you reach the end of your life. That's what my family had, and that's what I feel so many others deserve, but are denied. That's all I got. Thank you so much for listening to me, and letting me share my story with you all.